Hello, my naughty Jawas. So nice to see you again here at Attack of the Rhetoric, the hot spot for discussing sociology, mythology, and science as it pertains to the Star Wars universe. My name is Bob, and this week's episode is called Return of the Archetype. In most civilizations, whole cultures and religions were built on the science fiction of their day. It is just that. Now we call it science fiction. Before, they called it religion or myths or whatever they wanted to call it. First off, I'd like to look at some striking resemblance between psychologist Carl Jung's idea of the psyche and Star Wars creator George Lucas's idea of the Force. I have a bad feeling about this. And today, I read on StarWars.com in an article by Star Wars novel author Troy Denning, I believe that the Force is more of a mythic element than a psychological one, that its relevance is more collective than personal. And yes, I realize that those who know Jung well enough can argue that the mythic is psychological and the collective personal. Jung believed that the mind had two parts, the conscious and the unconscious. As the name suggests, everyone is already familiar with the conscious part of their psyche, but the unconscious part goes largely unnoticed, except by way of dreams and gut feelings. The mind seeks individuation, the reconciliation of both its parts. When the unconscious is neglected, that process cannot take place. The psyche becomes unbalanced and eventually dangerous. This dissociation can occur within individuals, but also within entire societies, and possibly within mystical energy fields. In a 1977 Rolling Stones interview with George Lucas, there is clear justification for these comparisons to the Jungian archetypal hero. In the article, Lucas says, "Before I became a film major, I was very heavily into social science. I had done a lot of sociology, anthropology, and I was playing in what I call social psychology, looking at a culture as a living organism, why it does what it does." And in a later paragraph from the same interview, I had also done a study on, I don't know what you call it, I call it the fairy tale or the myth. Mila Jaffe was personal secretary to Jung himself and of the Jung Institute in Zurich, and collaborator on his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. She writes in an essay, "Everything that once bound man to the human world, to earth, to time and space, to matter and the natural living of life, has been cast aside or dissolved. But unless the unconscious is balanced by the experience of consciousness, it will implacably reveal its contrary or negative aspect." In episode 2, Yoda remarks that arrogance is a flaw more and more common among the Jedi. The Jedi have become dissociated from the Force. They suppress their emotions and live in ivory towers in a bustling metropolis, blissful in their complacency, assured of eternal victory. The Jedi seem to have forgotten that the Force has two sides. They have ignored the Sith, the darker side of nature. Envy, lust, sensuality, lies, and all known vices are the negative, dark aspect of the unconscious, which can manifest itself in two ways. In the positive sense, it appears as a spirit of nature, creatively animating man, things, and the world. This loss of balance had dire consequences for Anakin Skywalker, who was hoped to be the balancing agent. Jung writes, "This means that the individual psyche is far from being safely synthesized. On the contrary, it threatens to fragment only too easily under the onslaught of unchecked emotions. We too can become dissociated and lose our identity." Anakin betrayed and murdered his own identity and assumed a new one. This inner transformation is symbolized by the persona of Darth Vader. In episode 1 of Attack of the Rhetoric, we have already looked at the Japanese influence on the Star Wars saga. Lucas himself said coyly, "Star Wars is slightly designed for Japan." Speaking of Japanese no-plays and performers, Jaffe tells us that masks are worn to submerge the humanity of the actor and allow them to take on the visage of beautiful or horrible spirits. In psychological terms, the mask transforms its wearer into an archetypal image. We get to see this transformation actually take place in Revenge of the Sith, as the mask of Vader is ominously placed over Anakin's face, swallowing him up. In a 1964 collection of works by Jungian psychologists called Man and His Symbols, collected, edited, and introduced by Carl Jung himself, Dr. Joseph Henderson writes about the archetypal myths, the template that virtually all cultures seem to follow in their heroes' journeys. Here are a few excerpts. Over and over again, one hears a tale describing a hero's miraculous but humble birth, his early proof of superhuman strength, his rapid rise to prominence or power, his triumphant struggle with the forces of evil, his fallibility to the sin of pride, and his fall through betrayal or a heroic sacrifice that ends in his death. Anakin had a miraculous and humble birth, or so Shmi says. Anakin is quickly identified as a unique individual, and this uniqueness is what leads to his downfall through excessive pride. Dr. Henderson goes on to relate the 4 distinct cycles in the evolution of the hero myth. They are trickster, hare, red horn, and twin cycles. He meets the requirements of an archetypal hero by passing such tests as winning a race, and by proving his ability in battle. Surely the comparison to Anakin is plain. If the prequel trilogy is the red horn cycle, then it is natural that the original trilogy would be the twin cycle. Again, the comparison is clear. Dr. Henderson had this to say about the twins. Originally united in the mother's womb, they were forced apart at birth. Yet they belong together, and it is necessary, though exceedingly difficult, to reunite them. The twins are indeed separated at birth in Episode 3, and it takes 3 movies to reunite them as siblings. Dr. Henderson says, in both the Red Horn cycle and that of the twins, we see the theme of sacrifice or death of the hero as a necessary cure for hubris, the pride that has overreached itself. Anakin fulfills both versions of the archetypal myth. As Anakin, he is betrayed by Obi-Wan and the Council, then dies symbolically for his overconfidence. Vader then makes a heroic sacrifice when he saves his son from the Emperor, resulting in his demise. This act of redemption gains him a spot beside Yoda and Old Ben. Anakin had been consumed by the dark side, but eventually he triumphs over his inner demons. As Carl Jung, speaking both mythically and metaphorically, says, the hero, although he has been devoured by a monster, appears again in a miraculous way, having overcome whatever monster it was that swallowed him. Jung is very concerned with the role the unconscious plays in dream symbolism. He relates the dreams of several patients who, in their dreams, foresaw a loved one's death. Jung says that the destructive nature of the unbalanced unconscious will often give warning of its unpleasant state. If left unheeded, the negative aspect of the psyche can lash out vengefully on the individual, even resulting in death. This is an important part of Anakin's motivations for succumbing to the dark side. Psychologist and scholar Marie-Louise von Franz writes, one finds that the magic that can cure the king proves to be something very special. To save the queen, his love, Anakin must discover this special magic, some consider to be unnatural. Only one thing seems to work, and that is to turn directly toward the approaching darkness without prejudice and totally naively. Dr. Henderson adds, the hero must realize that the shadow exists and that he can draw strength from it. He must come to terms with its destructive powers if he is to become sufficiently terrible to overcome the dragon. The dragon is, of course, symbolic of any difficult task. This is one more way in which Anakin conforms to the heroic archetype. Other concepts of Jung's share specific traits with the Force, the idea of synchronicity, for example. Jung felt, drawing on Eastern philosophy, that coincidental events can be meaningfully related, that traditional causality need not apply. Instead of A cause B, you have A tends to happen before B does. People jokingly explain away incongruities in Star Wars by saying, it was the Force. There's more truth in that than they may realize. All stories rely on a series of more or less plausible events to advance the plot. However, one is often left wondering why such and such had to happen such and such way. Star Wars is no different. Except here, we are actually informed that there is a consciousness, or unconsciousness, that is guiding those events. Jung believed that the unconscious could have a causal effect on conscious experience. He felt one day science would discover the unification of mind and matter, heaven and earth, and that the psyche is inseparable from the physical world. He called this the unus mundus, a psychophysical oneness of all life phenomena. All I want to do is share facts and philosophies that the love of Star Wars helped me to understand and to internalize. Lucas was working from an ancient template. Like other great writers, Lucas was consciously tapping into the collective unconscious. He says, "I didn't want to make a 2001. I wanted to make a space fantasy that was more in the genre of Edgar Rice Burroughs. Once the atomic bomb came, everybody got into monsters and science and what would happen with this and what would happen with that. I think speculative fiction is very valid, but they forgot the fairy tales and the dragons, and Tolkien and all the real heroes. I had done sociological research on what makes hit films. It is part of the sociological bent in me. I can't help it." How else do you explain the incredible success of Star Wars? Kubrick did the strongest thing in film in terms of the rational side of things, and I've tried to do the most in the irrational side of things, because I think we need it. Thanks for watching.